Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you today with the uh, next update in the Canadian Federal Election Prediction Series. I will note that I did skip last week because I had no polls. Ledger didn't post a poll last week, and no other third parties posted a poll. Or third parties, no other pollsters posted a poll other than Nanos, and I did not accept the Nanos poll because I think they had a really bad sample a couple weeks ago, and it really skewed their what's the word for it? So they have like a 4 week running moving average, and I think 3 weeks ago now they had a really bad sample, which skews their results. Essentially, their numbers are significantly different than all the other pollsters right now. All the other ones are roughly in the same ballpark for every party but the Liberals. Liberals have the largest range. I think it's the range of 34 to 39 in raw reporting. Everything else is like 1 to 2 points. Nanos is significantly different from even that. I believe they have even higher points for the Liberals. Well, I shouldn't really get into it because confidentiality agreement with the subscription. But needless to say, I think they just have one bad sample that happens. It's not their fault, but I am not going to be using it. But with what we did end up getting, this week we have a Ledger poll, an Abacus poll, a Main Street poll, and an Ipsos poll. So many polls have been included in this data collection, and it didn't really change much. Liberals picked up a seat in New Brunswick. I believe this would be St. John's. They picked up a seat in Ontario from the Conservatives. I don't know which one. Some GTA suburb, presumably. And the NDP picked up a seat from the Liberals in Manitoba, presumably Winnipeg Centre. I say presumably because I didn't actually look. My model does actually specifically say which seat it was. I just didn't bother to check because it's not that important. Or it's not like we're going to have an election anytime soon. I mean, technically speaking, we could have an election sometime soon, but it's doubtful. The other interesting notable change is Newfoundland has slipped below the 50% margin for the Liberals for the first time, and is now hovering in the high 49s, so it's still very safe, but it's smoothing out, if that makes sense. I'm expecting over the next 5 months that Newfoundland's going to get a lot closer. I don't think there's any reasonable situation where the NDP or the Conservatives would become the leading party in Newfoundland, but I think the Conservatives will probably end up gaining a seat or two in Newfoundland next election, assuming they don't run a terrible campaign. So yeah, that's generally aggregate changes. So let's look here at more raw numbers. So we look here, Conservatives and Green Party particularly did better in Newfoundland, while the Liberals did a bit worse. NDP's roughly the same. They've just been kind of hovering for the last 4 weeks around 19. Sorry, just above 19. So, not that much surprising. Green Party actually as a whole did a lot better in the Maritimes, but not enough to actually reliably gain a seat. Actually, nationally they did a lot better. I think that's what, 0.16? 0.16 is a pretty significant change. Mind you, this is a 2-week change, but it's still a pretty significant change from one update to another one. Conservatives seem to be about holding constant, and if we scroll over here, that result added to correlation still gives us a very strong correlation, so it's still almost certainly true that the Conservatives are gaining momentum nationally, but it clamps down on the magnitude of that momentum. conversely here, it's starting to look like the Liberals are losing momentum, but it's still a really, really low correlation. If you start excluding like this point because it's old and this point because it's an outlier, then it looks pretty solid. It's kind of like that. But I'm not going to exclude those because that's not my job, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not trying to predict where the Liberals are going to be in the future because that's pretty futile. It's more of a novel thing that these graphs are for, and try to visualize trends better. NDP are still sliding. It looks like this is more confident, but I'm still not 100% sold on this. Put that back up here. Block is stable, and green starting to look like they might be going back up, but it's still really low, so it could just be stable. You can kind of see here that there's really been no significant movement overall. So it is what it is. Let's just make this graph a bit bigger. We have the space for it. Doesn't really help you much looking at it, but you know, kind of interesting. Other vote and PPC have went up a little bit. I still don't have a PPC graph here. Doesn't really matter. I'll add that at some point, but they're still, like, if you look at all these numbers, they're still struggling to gain support, a concentration of support. New Brunswick, they have the most support nationally now. It's been like that for a couple weeks. And I could see that definitely happening. Them getting the most votes there. But it's such a small number of votes that it's not likely going to actually get a seat. I would say their best chance of a seat is Quebec, because I assume if Bernier runs in Boyce again, he will get a good share of the vote there as well. If he doesn't run there, then who knows. But overall, it looks pretty stable. There's a few fluctuations, but nothing significant enough to really change any of the calculus. Like, if we go back to the map here, yeah, the Liberals are lost a bit of ground, but they didn't. That's not translating into losing seats yet. So I think by all means that they're likely to carry forward, and barring campaigning, because campaigning can change everything, at the rate they're going, it looks like the Liberals would slide in comfortably to a similar minority government if an election were to happen, and nobody campaigned and we just voted tomorrow, or I guess today. If we all voted today, this is what it would likely look like. That said, if we start looking at where do the different parties have room to grow, so the Bloc, I think their upper limit in my model's close to 42. They could get up to 42 seats. Doesn't really mean anything. I would erode a bunch from conservatives and liberals, so I don't think that would affect much nationally. And, I mean, a strong bloc is a strong bloc. It doesn't really... They don't have a meaningful chance of winning government. Greens, I could see picking up Fredericton again, that maybe 2 seats, additional seats in BC, so 3 total in BC, 1 in New Brunswick and Fredericton. And maybe if an enemy Paul ran in Toronto Centre again, that was a very close race, so that's conceivable that she could actually pull that off and win that. Or if she ran somewhere else, I would assume she's... I don't know where she's from, but my gut feeling, or her, sorry, I'm not 100% certain where she's from, but I think it's Ontario. So my suspicion is barring local concerns of her being a quote-unquote carpetbagger, that she's probably going to run in like I'm Waterloo or Kitchener area, not Kitchener. I can't forget the riding. There's two ridings. I think Waterloo is one of them, and then there's another one in southwest of the GTA that the Greens did a good showing with just a generic candidate in 2019. So if the party leader ran there, presumably they would do even better. Party leaders generally outperform rank and file party members in elections, so I firmly believe once we know where an enemy Paul's running that the Greens are going to probably get 2 seats, but until then, it's hard to say. So the Greens, I think their upper limit's really 4 here. Others, I would be surprised if there's more than another other. NDP could get, what, 2 in BC, like 3 in Alberta, 3 in Saskatchewan. They're pretty close to where I think they can max out in Manitoba here. So what, that's 2, 8. They could probably pick up Northwest Territories. 9, probably 6 in Ontario for 15. 2 in Nova Scotia. And then probably like 3 or 4 in Quebec, so they could get, if math is correct, they're like 46. They could get to 46 seats if they did a really good campaign. I think that's completely plausible. I wouldn't count on it. I wouldn't expect it. And frankly, I expect Singh will perform worse than he did in 2019, mostly because it looks like Trudeau's just taking all of his ideas and implementing them. I don't know what he's going to run on. The NDP has a hard time running when the Liberals start doing all their policy ideas, because generally the differentiating factor is the NDP want to do a bunch of left-wing policy points, and the Liberals just want to keep status quo and maybe tweak a few things. Sorry, the Liberals are like status quo, but we tweak a few things to do some left-wing policy ideas. The Conservatives are keep status quo, but tweak a few things to right-wing policy ideas. NDP is like, fuck status quo, we're doing left-wing stuff, and the Green Party is like, fuck status quo, we're doing green stuff, which is often left-wing for some reason. There's a weird correlation there globally between green and left-wing, even though it's not necessarily the case. But that's neither here nor there. The Conservatives, to go back to potential seat caps, I think 2 more in BC's would be the most they could get there. 1 in Alberta, 1 in Saskatchewan from the Liberals. I think the NDP seat in Alberta is pretty much safe. I think they've pretty much capped out Manitoba at reasonable levels. 6 in Ontario, 2 in Quebec, 2 in New Brunswick, 4 in Nova Scotia, Yukon, and 2 in Newfoundland, I think would be close, and 1 in PEI, would be close to approaching. So 22 total. 22 is within reason that the Conservatives could pick up if they did a good campaign, which would give them 146, and because most of these seats are coming from the Liberals, that would comfortably give them minority government. It'd be a pretty weak minority government, but they could still operate as a functional 2-party majority by getting the Bloc to agree with them. And frankly, at this point, the Bloc is siding with the Conservatives a lot in this Liberal minority parliament, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's pretty easy for the Conservatives to keep the Bloc on board. without actually having to cater too heavily to the bloc itself. Unlike the Liberals have to quite cater with the NDP quite a lot, it doesn't seem like that the Conservatives have to cater that hard to keep the bloc on board, because a lot of the Conservative ideas are not bad for Quebec in general. Like there's some that you could argue are, or at least the bloc consider them bad for Quebec, but a lot of it is to give more power to the provinces, more or less. So I don't think the bloc will have a problem with that. But there we are. Not much has changed. There's a few seats flipping around, but that's pretty constant. I think it would be almost impossible to run this, get even one new poll added to the model and not see at least one seat move. So, really not much. There is some underlying trends going on, which I think are bad news for the Liberals in the long term. I just don't think that they will be long or detrimental soon enough for it to matter. And by soon enough to matter, I mean the next election is probably going to be April, May 2021, the way around the next time the budget's released. Sorry, it'll be triggered by the next budget release, likely, once the virus is under control, which will probably put the actual day of the election in April or May, depending on exactly when the budget's released. So, yeah, if you liked the video, please like, share, subscribe. Otherwise, have a good evening.